Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Samantha Barrett, and I am the Assistant Director of Regional Engagement for the Southeast U.S. I thank you all for being with us today and hope that you are all healthy and safe. During this time of social distancing, the Rutgers University Alumni Association is offering virtual programs to highlight the important work being done at the university and around the world by our alumni, and to help keep our community connected. Today, we are honored to have with us Kelly Mannel, 1983 Rutgers College graduate whose career spans 30 years of field operations and delivery, who currently serves using emotional intelligence, executive C-suite coach, and leadership development with a focus on healthcare and higher education. Kelly is also currently a meta-coach with Goldman EI. Daniel Goldman, along with Carrie Chernis, Rutgers professor and current co-chair of the EI Consortium for Research on Emotional Intelligence in Organizations that is housed at Rutgers University. Just a bit of housekeeping before we begin. All attendees have been placed on mute for the duration of this discussion. If you have questions, please send them via the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen at any time during the presentation, and please use the raise your hand tool on the left of the screen above the chat section when Kelly asks your questions during her discussion. It is now my privilege to turn it over to Kelly Mannel.
Thank you so much, Samantha, and thank you also, Marina, for having me. I really do appreciate. I feel like I'm back home. Are you? It's so exciting. So thank you all, by the way, for coming. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know that there's a lot going on right now, and I know you're in all different time zones, so I do appreciate your time today. Hopefully there's something that we're going to do today that's of a service to you. So I'd like to begin by discussing something that's important to all of us. I think right now, all the obvious things that are going on in our minds are present. And so what I'd like to be able to do is help us address those and give us some practical tools as well. So in our recent call with Daniel Goldman, what we talked about, and Dan's opened the call, I thought that was brilliant by saying, that he felt that there were two pandemics. One was the COVID-19 pandemic, and the other was a pandemic of fear. And I could not agree more. So essentially all this information in this session has come from a lot of research from all the folks that have been doing beautiful research in neuroscience and emotional intelligence for the last 30 or more years. So what I hope to offer are a sound discussion around the personal development of resilience and ideas on how one can develop the building blocks of personal resilience, which we're all going to need a lot more of right now. We're going to discuss emotional balance and how it plays a key role in resilience, the development of self-compassion, and how it helps build our immunity to stress, how we can build resilience and a positive outlook moving forward. By the way, shout out to Dr. Monica and Arch, who did the science and soul of resilience on Friday for the other department, and I think it was an absolute job. And she talked a bit about the research and the science of resilience, and what we're going to talk about today is hopefully leveraging on that kind of conversation to take it on now more on a personal level. How can we as individuals, so I'd like to be able to do is close the gap between here and here, close the gap between what we think we might know intellectually and what we might know emotionally and behaviorally. And so I think that's where we're going to focus our time today. All right, so this overview is going to be talking about, again, resilience, self-compassion, and hopefully we'll spend more time. I'm going to weight our conversation today a little bit more on positive outlook. So I think that's going to serve us the most at the moment. The pictures in here, most of them, I want to say I've taken myself, some of them I have purchased, but I want you to see, this is what I call Resurrection Fern. Got a lot of that in our backyard here in Florida. And I want to share some thoughts because pictures so loudly to me. In the Resurrection Fern, if you're familiar with this fern, it's very tiny. You can live on the sides of trees and in beds, flower beds. And I can tell you that after a beautiful rain, it will pop up and look brand new again. In between rains and during time of drought, it'll look all shriveled up and as though it's not even alive. So I always find my inspiration when I look out in the yard after a good rain and look at my Resurrection Fern. So we're going to talk about a little bit about recovery. How can we be resilient right now? Which means how are we able to quickly adapt, making us better able to leverage change, solve problems, and also use that to settle conflict? How do we develop our self-compassion, which helps us build our immunity to stress? how we're going to talk about defining self-compassion, what it is and what it isn't. And also we're going to talk about how do we build a positive outlook in life. And some people will say, my gosh, Kelly, don't be a Pollyanna, now's not the time. And I have to say, yes, now is more the time than ever to be looking at how we specifically can build a positive outlook for ourselves, for our families, for our workplaces, and of course, for our communities. So I'm going to make reference on occasion to Dan Goleman. We called it our domains of emotional intelligence. And there are generally 4 domains that are well understood in this research area, and they're talked about as being self-awareness, self-regulation, social awareness, and relationship management. We're going to focus the most of our talk on areas and skills and competencies that lie within the first 2 domains, which is self-awareness and self-regulation. Now, the good news is, and the research shows that yes, we have a certain level of IQ. We come into this world with a certain level of IQ. We can nurture it a bit, and it remains pretty stable throughout most of our lives. The good news is about emotional intelligence and these types of domains and these competencies within the domains, they can be developed for the rest of our lives. So wherever your starting point is, don't worry, that's your starting point and you can keep on going. So that is the absolute best news. And these skills that we're going to talk about today are all lie within those domains. These are all competencies that we all have the ability to develop no matter what. So again, here's another picture I took on the beach last summer in Ireland. And so I use it to help remind myself that we all have levels of emotional balance, and then these things are very, very tricky. It took me half an hour to stack these, believe it or not. And why was that so hard? And when I think about what is our emotional balance, and that consists of a couple different areas and skill sets of self-compassion, positivity, and resilience. So these are what we call are the components of it. There's a quoted that a beautiful quote. I love this. It says, anyone can hold a helm when the sea is calm. That's right. And so when it's not calm, or when we're out of balance, or when we're shaky. So I liken this to think about, I talk to my clients about, pretend that we're having a bit of an earthquake at the moment. And typically earthquakes will stop and we all regain our balance and we rebuild. Right now, we've been experiencing an earthquake that continues and continues. And we have continuous behavior around it, and we have aftershocks. And so what we're seeing now is some sort of an earthquake that is continuing to shake our foundation. And what we knew or used to know before that might even have worked for us before may not work right now in the same ways. And so I think about this in terms of building or replacing our building blocks or revisiting our building blocks. And that goes all the way back to the basics. And I talk about sleeping. We're in a sleep pandemic as well. We're not getting enough sleep, right? Are we eating well? And these are all basic. And I know you said, Kelly, I already know these things. And so I'm going to just say these things to remind us. So we're talking about emotional balance and how it plays a role in resilience. So the big question I'm going to pose to the audience right now, and just jot it down for yourself, and we can talk about it during the Q&A, is on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being, I really got this, I'm good. 1 being, I really could use some help right now. Take a notation or a mental notation and say to yourself, where do I think I lie in this right now? Am I in a 1 or 2 scale, or am I up 8 or 9? Am I doing quite well? And so we ask ourselves if we're doing well, what's working well? We remind ourselves what's working well. If we're anywhere in the lower end of the scale, we might ask ourselves, what do I need more of right now? What do I need more of to serve myself, to service myself? And that is the beginning of the conversation of what we call self-compassion as well. So we're going to be talking about recovery, which means being resilient. How do we do that? Monica mentioned on Friday, the idea about staying calm, staying rational, right? We talked about the idea of hijacking. And when we're excited or nervous or scared, we might become hijacked. And this is something that's quite natural for all humans to get hijacked. When we're hijacked, all these stress hormones will rush through our bodies and through our minds. When we're hijacked, our vision gets smaller. All of our senses shrink. Our muscle or big muscles want to get filled with all this energy and want to do something about it, right? And so what happens to us when we're feeling hijacked right now? And that could happen with a flick of an eye. It happens by just turning on our phone and looking at the news perhaps this morning. It can happen just that quickly. It's going to take us a little while, hours, to recover from a hijack. So I'm going to ask you, on a scale of 1 to 10, where are you with that? How are you handling that? And do you know what your recovery methods are? So when we talk about hijacking, we often talk about this in coaching and say to our clients, hey, let's focus on something that we have control over right now. And so for people that talk about mindfulness, we talk about things that are related to mindfulness, and that has to do with our breath. So I'm going to share some thoughts with you today, and another one has to do with beautiful work that Dr. Dan Siegel has done, and this is a quote out of his recent book called Aware. And he says, where our attention goes, our neural firing flows, and our neural connection grows.
Kelly,
Yes.
sounds like you got a bit of static going on. If you have paper notes in your hand, it might be rustling in front of yours.
Got you. Thank you so much. I'll be much more careful. Thank you so much. So we're talking about where attention goes, neural firing flows, and neural connection grows. So essentially what we're talking about is managing our focus. Whatever we focus on is what grows. So if we're focused on our phone, focused on our news all the time, this could also grow in our mind as well and build the fear that we might want to be staying away from right now. So I'm going to do a little exercise with you just so you can follow along with me. Shout out to Christine Tolbert for this exercise as well. So we're going to talk about taking a second and looking around the room and looking for one thing that's black. So take a second and look around your room, see if you can find anything that's black, even if it's just of a corner of something. So close your eyes for a second and think about that thing that you noticed that was black. Lampshade or a table, whatever it was, think about it for a second. Now, while your eyes are closed, think about something in the room that you noticed that was red, or perhaps green or blue. Can you imagine that right now? So open your eyes and let's think about what we're learning from that exercise. Did we notice now? Can we open our eyes? Are we noticing things that were red or green or blue? If you were to do this exercise over and over again, what we're noticing is that whatever we focus on will be the focus of our attention. So this is an important skill that we're thinking about developing when we're focusing on learning how to focus our attention and focusing on the things that are helpful or healthy for us. So when talking about this, there's a recent study of 1,000 executives that revealed that the number one characteristic that distinguished the best leaders and is their ability to stay balanced. And that means that they had the ability to understand how to focus their attention. There we go. So we're going to talk for a second about the markers of emotional balance. And I think of swimmers. There are a lot of swimmers in our neighborhood. And I'm just so amazed at when I watch them work out and from day to day do circuits and weights and then get back in the pool and recover from injuries. And these are all very, very young people. It's so impressive to watch them. And when you look at what they're doing, they're spending a lot of time focusing their attention on their ability to be resilient, right? They learn how to reframe conversations in their mind. And so if you listen to their coaches, the coaches won't say that you failed today. The coaches are saying, you're looking for this time and you're this close to getting that time and tomorrow's another day. So I want you to go home and get some good sleep, and get some good mental rest and get some good nutrition and food and relax a little. And then we're going to come back tomorrow and we're going to do it again. So when we look at these conversations that really good coaches will do, they'll talk about what we've done well, talk about our building blocks, focusing on our building blocks and our efforts, and then coming back again with a positive outlook to do it again and again and again. Now, if you think about it, if these swimmers went home every night saying, oh, I failed, I didn't get the time that I want, then they wouldn't have the hours and hours and years and the hundreds and thousands of laps that they would need to have for that one day where they wanted to get a certain time and win. When we think about this is a habit of mind and a way of focusing our time and our attention and our energy. And we can do this as well. We don't have to be an Olympic swimmer or even a high school swimmer to do it. We have to understand that we have the capacity to do it and that what we're going to focus on will grow in our minds, which requires this notion of backing to the domain about self-awareness, which is the notion of recognition. How do I recognize how my body's responding to stress? The understanding the notion of self-recovery and how self-compassion plays a role in our recovery. And then our ability to regulate our mind and our body and our spirit. So I put this slide in there because I want to remind folks that the notion of this cowboy, that somebody is somebody that can focus and do things all on their own and then save the day and then get back on their horse, light a cigarette and run off into the sunset. This is the mythology of Hollywood. And I know in our Western society, we're very attuned to this mythology. We think that perhaps we should be this strong and independent, when really research shows that we're actually built and wired to connect. And really, so a resilient person is someone who recognizes this in themselves and reaches out to others. I'm going to give a shout out to my neighborhood group of ladies that decided within days of the pandemic being announced, they formed a little workout group which have grown and grown and grown. And in the mornings, we just literally just drag our mats out to the sidewalk and we just start working out together, recognizing that every one of our normal resources was shut down. And so they recognized in themselves that we needed each other, that we needed to defer to those in the group that had the level of expertise. And then we also needed to do the third thing, which is show up day in and day out, even if you didn't want to keep showing up. And then if somebody doesn't show up, we all check in on each other. Are they okay? Is this person okay? And this is an important component because we're not cowboys and we're not going to run off into the sunset. A resilient person recognizes that what we need to do is reach out, which might mean being vulnerable to others in our world and saying, you know, I might need some help today, which is helpful in this conversation of what we call developing a positive outlook. I put this picture up here because this has recently been in the news. The BBC has been discussing how these children in China, in one province of China, usually climb an 800-meter ladder every morning. These are tiny children to school every single day. So some people will say to me, Kelly, we're not all that resilient. I can't change that much. And I say, look at the resilience of humans have always had. Humans always have found a way to manage and conquer the environment that they've needed to manage in, as these children have been doing for a long time, and it has generations before them to get where they needed to go. Now in the US and the Western, we haven't worked that hard to perhaps get to school every day, but these children have managed it, right? So I want to think about what perspective are we keeping for ourselves, and are we more adaptable than we think we really are? So I'm going to bring into the work right now Dr. Christian Neff, who's done her postdoctoral research work on self-compassion. Some of her work is some of the most beautiful work that's available to us today, and I really would encourage all of you to get her books and to take a look at the work. And she talks about having these inner voices. So this illustrates that this slide shows that there's a critical voice or a self-compassionate voice. So are we an inner ally or are we an inner enemy? And these are the words that she would use to describe these conversations that we have to ourselves. And self-compassion involves understanding and being self-aware of this inner voice that we have with ourselves. What is this inner voice or inner coach saying to us? Are we overly critical, saying, gosh, I should be able to manage this, I could be able to manage this? Or is this inner voice an inner ally who's saying to us, well, perhaps I'm on the lower end of the scale today and I'm not managing well. I might need to reach out. I might need a friend. I might need to call on someone or a professional to help me work through this. This is really, really difficult right now. And if you felt that way, you would not be alone. You would absolutely not be alone. So we talk about self-compassion as being self-kindness versus self-judgment, right? It's the notion of that having the conversation as if we're failing, or do we reframe it as learning? All right, so I may not be good at this yet, and I'm still learning, and I'm going to go to bed, eat well, sleep well, come back at it tomorrow, and I'm going to practice a little bit more. All of our worlds are turned upside down. There is no one exception to this on this whole planet right now. And so you are not alone. Everyone is going to have to manage with the shaking of this earthquake. Everyone is going to have to manage with the continued aftershocks, and everyone is going to have to manage with rebuilding. And we're going to need each other in order to rebuild, which means reaching out, understanding that we might not be feeling it right now, and we're still going to keep showing up over and over again. So I'm going to share another point around self-compassion. And then I'd like to be able to share this idea that it's quite natural. So when we look at a child, we say, of course, we want to be compassionate toward children. And I want to ask ourselves that when does this end and why does it end? If we're self-compassionate when we're a child to ourselves and to other children, when did that end? And why did it end, right? So do we go to a certain school or see friends, or do we have adults in our life that saying, well, you're not good enough. You need to work harder. You're not good enough. Does that help create that inner critic in our mind, or that voice that gets developed? And who in our lives helps us develop that inner ally? And if we can't think of who that person is right now, we need to develop that person, and we can be that person, which means recognizing the vulnerability in ourselves and recognizing that we all need the self-compassion speaking to us inside of our minds and inside of our hearts. So one of my friends, Bella Shaw, she talks about self-compassion being our natural birthright. This is part of our natural state is compassionate toward ourselves and toward one another. What else is self-compassion? So when people say, how do I begin to develop my self-compassion? I talk about that as self-care, which means listening, deep, deep listening. The first listening is that self-awareness domain we talk about as being self-care, listening to our bodies, listening to our minds, listening to our emotions. What are our emotions? Can I listen to what our emotions are saying? Can I name those emotions? Am I able to name them honestly for myself? And then sit with that moment and live with that emotion so that I can recognize it, I can understand it, and then I can deal with it. If I can name it, I can reframe it, right? So this idea of, am I tired? Am I lonely? Am I hungry, right? These are self-compassionate components, self-compassionate moments, right? And they're asking ourselves, what are our needs? Do I need to take care of something for myself right now? So the next piece I'd like to share is this notion of taking perspective, right? Shifting perspective. How developing self-compassion can change things for me. How can that change? Can I build a different perspective about what my needs are if I develop, or when I develop, or increase my ability to have that self-compassionate coach within me? What is that person going to say to me? So we talked about the cowboys running off into the West, right? We talked about the students and how resilient they are getting in the pool every single day, not ever knowing if they're going to win this scholarship or whether they're going to ever be an Olympian. And what do they learn while they're doing this? They learn to reframe, they learn self-compassion, they learn how to be resilient, recover from injury, right? So that they can get back at it over and over again. So I talk about that as a component of applying universal empathy to ourselves and to others. We need to remind ourselves that this is part of our ability to relate to others. Our ability to relate automatically stems also from our ability to do it for ourselves. So there's always somebody in the professor will say, or somebody, Kelly, I can't be self-empathetic because I'll never get anything done. If I give in to that, if I give in to my fears, if I get into my loneliness, give into all of this, I just wouldn't get out of bed, right? So this notion of being self-compassion being getting in the way of getting stuff done, I would like to argue the opposite, that when we're able to be self-compassionate and address these issues, then we can do a better job of taking care of ourselves, right? And if we are tired or lonely or hungry, we take care of those things. We're a biological creature. We're wired to connect, and we also need others. And so the idea here is that we can lean into our self-compassion, take care of our needs, and that would actually help us become more resilient. So we're all fans of Calvin and Hobbes. I love them, and we have had all the books in our house for our children, for ourselves growing up. And he's saying to them, we're so busy watching out for what's just ahead of us that we don't take time to enjoy where we are. So this brings up a conversation around what I call mindfulness as being a characteristic of positive outlook, right? Now, mindfulness can mean that we're living more in the moment, not so much in the future, not so much in the past. And it means we're living right now, right here, because right here and right now is really all we ever have, right? And what a gift it is that we're all here together right now with each other. This is a mindful moment because we're recognizing it, we're self-aware, we're here together, and we're appreciating it together. So this is a component or a characteristic of positive outlook. Resilience, we've talked about that. And now we're going to talk a little bit more about gratitude and the notion of acceptance. So we talk about being able to develop a positive outlook, that it can take practice and the focused awareness. The exercise we did earlier about focusing on one object in the room, can we apply that to all this other stuff that's going on? If we just focus on the negative in the world, or focus only on the pandemic, or only on some of the things that can go wrong, could that skew our moods and our minds at this moment? So what I'd like to invite us to do is be sure, yes, check the news for what's important, and shift our lens and focus away. So for instance, as Fred Rogers always said, look for the helpers in the world. So shift our focus, for instance, to the helpers, the people that are helping. What are they doing? They look like they could be resilient people. Maybe we can hang out with them. Maybe we can help them. Maybe we could do something for them. Maybe there's something we can think of doing. When we hang around them or watch them, observe them, we can learn what resilience looks like. We can also learn what it looks like for ourselves and within ourselves, and can discover new things for ourselves when we shift that lens, shift the, right? Here's an example of an exercise I teach the healthcare workers when I go in those environments. I talk to them about finding what I call micro practice. This is an example of a micro practice. Shout out to Michelle Maldonado, my coach at Goldman EI. And so she taught me this exercise first. And the idea here is that, say, for instance, you're on the healthcare and you might be working at other places, but we all have to use the hand sanitizers now. So we might hit the hand sanitizer outside the door. And here's how it would go. We breathe in. I am doing my best. So this is what our inner ally says to me. I breathe out and I reset, right? If we're not sure we reset, we do it again. I breathe in, I'm doing my best, out, and I reset. So this is an exercise doctors and nurses and healthcare providers, we talk about all the time in the healthcare environment. So when they walk into the next room, they can be there for you, if it's you or your family in that room. So say you're just at a regular doctor's visit, we can do that as well. Say you're going into a conference room in a meeting fairly soon in your workplace. In and then out. Say we're just moving from the kitchen to the dining room, we're going to take a Zoom call. In and then out. Perhaps if we're going to be home for a really long time and working from home, as we move from room to visit with our children, to help with homework. Breathe in, I'm doing my best, breathe out, and I reset. So I'd like to invite us to use this micro practice, People are saying, Kelly, I can't get out of the house to a big class today or something. And I could say, hey, what if we were to use micro practices within our small environments, within the workplace that we're in, wherever we are, we can use the micro practice. So I'd like to invite you to build on that micro practice to see how that goes. Teach your families, teach your workplaces so that we have an opportunity to breathe life into the moment, breathe life into ourselves, and breathe life into our families and workplaces. This gives us a chance to create space between this event and that event, create space for us to help us make better decisions, perhaps, especially if we're nervous or getting hijacked. We're going to breathe, do our best, and then we're going to reset. I hope this is a helpful exercise for all of you. I really enjoy it, and I do it quite frequently myself. So, along with my promise to share with you other ways that we can develop a positive outlook, is to talk about creating a gratitude journal. I'm sure many of you already keep some sort of a journal, and if you don't, I'd like to invite you to think about it. So, for example, you get just a little, it could be just a very, very simple notebook that you find in your house, or just a regular $3 pad from the grocery store, or $1. What I encourage you to do would be to, on the left-hand side, 3 things that you're going to appreciate, that you're going to look forward to for the day. So what could I be looking forward to? So my day is filled with stress and cooking, teaching the children, Zoom calls, missed deadlines. What could I possibly be looking forward to? So maybe I reframe and I say, well, I'm going to be looking forward to, I know other people are baking bread right now. Maybe I'm going to try my recipe or my cousin's recipe. I'm going to bake bread right now. Maybe I look forward to a walk. I'm finally getting outside. Maybe I look forward to a Zoom call with my friend. I decided to do Zooming with friends. Maybe I'm looking forward to that. Maybe I'm going to call someone on the phone and just chat. Now I'm writing this down and I'm saying to myself, yes, I'm looking forward to this. I'm going to ask you to take one more step and write down why you're looking forward to it. Why specifically am I looking forward to that? How might I feel that I'm looking forward to this? And then put your notebook down beside your bed. At the end of the day, come back and on the page on the other side, write 3 things that I appreciated from the day. They could be the things that you wrote down this morning. They could be very different things. You might not have had a chance to do that Zoom call or bake that bread, but the neighbor could have stopped by and dropped some food off for you, or that hand sanitizer you were looking for. So I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that somebody called me today. I really appreciate that. And I'm grateful again for my family, because even though we're all getting grumpy, we really did have a good laugh at dinner. And so focus on what it is that we were grateful for. Again, that helps us move that lens. It changes our neurobiology, and it could actually help us sleep a little better. Something we talked about being a building block of building our positive psychology. And here's one of my last ones I'm going to be sharing with you. It's quite well known in the mindfulness community. And if you're not familiar with it, I'll share with you this idea of, again, it's a simple, what we call loving kindness guided practice. And so I'll just read it so we can enjoy it with me together. So for all of you, I'm going to share, may I be peaceful. May I be healthy. May I be happy. May I be strong. May I be safe, and may I be free. Now I'm going to extend to all of you. May you be peaceful. May you be healthy. May you be happy. May you be strong. May you be safe, and may you be free. For those of you who like to take that extra step when you get a chance, think of someone you might struggle to find kind thoughts about right now, kind and loving thoughts. And when you're ready, practice this loving kindness practice for them. May they be peaceful. May they be healthy. May they be happy. May they be strong. May they be safe, and may they be free. So in summary, I'd like to share some thoughts about things that we might want to remember. Number 1, to be kind to ourselves. Listen to our body for cues. This is our self-awareness domain. that helps us develop our self-compassion. Remember, we don't have to believe everything we think. If we find ourselves going down and down into ruminating thoughts, I'd like for you to invite yourself to interrupt them with a mindful practice, or perhaps a walk, or call a friend with a positive outlook, so that we can shift our focus. Remember that self-compassion is the key to managing our stress and developing our resilience. Check in daily with our emotional balance. Ask ourselves from a 1 to 10, how do I feel? So I want to remember that what I focus on will grow. Reach out to those who offer positive energy. And if you're that person, reach out. We're going to be thinking about finding our inner ally and listen to her or him. Help someone else if you can. And again, rest in gratitude. I'll close with this thought. This is inspiration from one of our coaches in our group that she was really lovely, describing how in this practice that they talk about in the Japanese broken objects, they aggrandize the damage, they were filling the cracks with gold. They believe that when something suffered damage and as history, it becomes more beautiful. So there's no doubt that there's been a lot of damage. And so I'd like to invite us to think of, as we put things back together after the aftershakes, hopefully they begin to stop. And as we rebuild our homes and our communities and our workplaces, that we fill everything with gold, and we are contributing filling of gold. And think about how much more beautiful things will be when we've contributed to our homes and our houses and our communities in that way. So I'd like to begin by opening up to questions and answers for the group. And I know that Samantha and Marina we have some thoughts that we prepared. If you'd like to ask those, and we can begin that segment.
Sure. So I actually wanted to let you know the responses from the question that we asked with the registration, which was on a scale of 1 to 10, how's your emotional balance? The majority of the responses were between 5 and 8, and the most was at 7, and we only had 1 1, and we had 12 10s.
Very good. Very good.
So I've had a couple questions sent to me privately. So the first question is, so during the beginning of quarantine, it was really tough. Was feeling really low, but got back on track, and emotions were getting higher, but the worry is going back to the not so good state and how to avoid that.
Yeah. So I recognize that. So a lot of my clients and both the corporations and the individuals are talking about this sort of, we talked about as I talk about as an aftershock, is sort of the notion that it doesn't sort of get better and then just stay better potentially for any of us. So I would encourage, and I know that people have all different types of resources, and so I apologize to anyone who don't have all these resources, but I want to state some of the obvious at first. If you have employment and you are with an employer that has an EAP program, I would highly, highly recommend that you reach out to them right now. There are typically, from 6 to 10 to perhaps 20 free sessions that come with any EAP service, and they're pretty accustomed to dealing with what I call with standard stress response to situations. Kristen Neff would talk about, she was talking about this notion of, as we build our self-compassion, there was a study that was done by her group that studied people coming back from war. And she talked about folks that registered higher in self-compassion were able to perhaps bounce back or build more resilience and had a better ability to manage and may not have developed PTSD. So there's heavy research that points toward getting help in a professional way. And so I would encourage you to do that. If you're able to buy services, that's wonderful. I know that there are a lot of beautiful online services right now. BetterHelp.com is one of them. There are a number of others, and I know they're very, very reasonable, and they're often worked on a sliding scale. They offer all sorts of opportunities if you share with them that your financial situation. They offer other services. I knew Headspace.com, which is an app, mindfulness app. Insight Timer has 45,000 free meditations. Headspace is offering free services right now as well. Calm.com is another app that's offering free services. And all of these services have folks that work through mindfulness practices, give entire courses sometimes in self-resilience and just the building blocks of that. Breathing exercises can be helpful. And so what I would encourage people to do is reach out for anyone who's measuring on that lower end of the scale, like below 5, or that one person with 1. I would say call someone immediately and see if you can get someone into your world to listen to what your thoughts are right now. And just also know that you are absolutely not alone. You have a lot of company right now. You are absolutely not alone. I hope that helps, Samantha. Do you think?
Absolutely. And I actually kind of going to tail end on the app question. What is your favorite one to use or to recommend?
So I do have a favorite, Insight Timer. I have a lot of friends that actually have meditations on Insight Timer, and I listen to them. A lot of friends that I've met through the Goldman EI program. So they're very talented, and also there's 45,000 free ones. So I kind of like the free thing because I'm on there almost daily, sometimes twice a day. I noticed that I'm a meditator and I spend a lot of time. I found that I had to triple my meditation time in the day to find that balance that I was having before that. And so wherever we start, we might have to double, triple, and quadruple the amount of resilient work that we're doing for ourselves to feel okay again, so that we can function, so that we can move forward, show up and do whatever we need to do. So I would encourage you to deepen those areas. And I know that not everybody has that luxury. I completely recognize that. So even if it's walking from here to there, think about the mindfulness practices of your deep breathing. We're all going to have to walk somewhere. So perhaps we can do it then and there. So hopefully that helps also, Smith.
Yes, thank you. I have one more question. What are your recommendations and thoughts as we start to re-socialize and get back to our new normal?
Right. So remember we talked about the earthquake, and it's perhaps still shaking. I believe that there are going to continue to be a lot of aftershocks. And so when somebody says, "Oh, I'm going to start going back to the office 1 day a week," or "my workplace is allowing," so just recognize that just about everything we knew before is going to end up being a little different. And so there'll be a whole new set of things to get used to, whole new set of stressors. And so I would encourage you to, again, make a lot of space. So perhaps somebody's moved your, or you don't sit next to anyone you know anymore, or you have to work at a shift between 4 and 8 o'clock in the evening. I don't know. And so this may not be convenient, might not be helpful for you. It may feel worrisome. And so we'll all still have to take many, many, many steps that are still coming our way, that are going to require us to dig really deep around that. So what I'd encourage you to do is find your community, whether it's your household or your friendships, that will continue to support you during these next stages. Build community around yourself for what these skills are going to look like. So if you're inclined to meditate, or if you have your other ways that you pray or mindfulness practices, find some other people to do it with, right? So one of the things I like about Insight Timer is it shows you a little map of the world and how many people in the world are doing it at the same time. So in a strange way, we're all together. We're far apart, but we're all together. And I can see that there's 4 million people meditating at the same time I am. And meditating doesn't mean that we're sitting on a little pillow or ringing a bell. A lot of times I will just get on and put on some very quiet music as I set up for a Zoom call, and it helps relax my neurobiology, right? And so think of these things as just micro steps toward building your resilience blocks and continuing to answer the call of whatever your body's saying it needs. So remember that graphic we had of listening? Keep listening, right? And she or he will answer. They will answer. What do I need now? Right? And so hopefully that helps a little bit as well.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you so much, Kelly, and thank you everyone for joining us today. You're going to receive a follow-up email that's going to include Kelly's contact information for more questions that you may have and some helpful links. We hope you will join us again for another IUAA presentation. Stay connected and check out upcoming events at ouralumni.com. Bye, everybody.